This video was made possible by the Eliason Group, an Agile consulting service. You can locate the video under Follow Us, then select Recent Videos on YouTube on the agilenewengland.org website.
So I finished introducing myself. I have been working with leaders for several decades, helping them build strong, empowering leadership teams. And I have been helping them to create cultures in their organizations that are conducive to implementing all kinds of different changes in their organizations. So that's a quick overview of my background. I guess I should say that I did co-author this book called Leadership Agility, which I'm going to reference in a few minutes. And I got my doctorate in leadership and organization development from Harvard University. All of the consulting work that I have done and continue to do, and the research that I did for the book, which was pretty considerable, have convinced me that, number one, in today's world we need a different kind of leadership than we have needed in the past. And number two, that at the heart of this kind of leadership that is needed everywhere is agility. So now this topic of agile leadership has been coming to the fore, as you may know, primarily for two reasons. One of them is, of course, is the great success of Agile. The fact that it's like, if you're not doing Agile, what are you doing? Right? And it's spilling over into all the other functions. So now we have Agile marketing and Agile HR and Agile fill in the blank. All the different management functions are beginning to go Agile. And as that's happening, of course, then executives are beginning to become really interested in the topic of organizational agility or business agility. How could we make our whole organization agile? And as companies have moved down this path, which more and more companies in the last couple of years are really pursuing the organizational agility quest, one of the main things they're finding out is that there's something missing often in their attempts to create an agile organization, and that's primarily in the realm of leadership and culture. Tonight I'm going to talk about a fresh approach to agile leadership called leadership agility, which I think I would pose the question: are the models we have currently of agile leadership, are they adequate for understanding what is needed to create agile organizations? And I'm going to pose some new ideas along those lines. So let's see, I think I've probably completely used up that slide with what I just said. So let me move on. So I mentioned this book. Now, the concepts and the practices that I'm going to be talking about tonight come largely from the research underlying this book, which took 5 years to research. So the research is very in-depth, very hands-on, combination quantitative and qualitative. And the key questions that I was asking writing the book was, what kind of leadership do we need in today's world? How do highly agile leaders think? And how do they act? And how do they develop such high levels of agility? So that's all going to be infusing what we're talking about. Just to quickly run through what to expect this evening, I'm going to talk a little bit about organizational agility and the business case for that. But I'm going to go pretty quickly to introducing you to the core practice of leadership agility. We're actually going to begin practicing it in a particular initial form tonight. And then I'm going to take that core practice and show you how to use it in 4 different ways. These are what I call the 4 types of leadership agility. And then we're going to go on to what I think is the most unique aspect of this framework, which has to do with levels of leadership agility, the idea that you can grow and develop into new levels of agility as a leader. And I'm not sure we're going to have time for stories, having just reviewed everything. But we'll add some in if we can, or do it during the Q&A. And the last thing I want to mention is, before I wrap up, I want to say a couple of things about this new tool called the Leadership Agility Accelerator. This is something that you can take online on your own and assess your current level of agility and pick practices that you can use to enhance your agility. So we are, as part of our contribution to the raffle tonight, we're raffling away 5 of these. It's an $89 value. You are the winner of this. You get to try it out, use it on your own. So anyway, we're going to raffle those off. And we also have a handout. And if you get a hold of the handout and you contact us, you get half off. So there's one of them waving around right now. I think we're going to pass these out at the end. Yeah, so or allow you to, there's something you can put something into for a raffle and so on. Anyway, that's what we'll wind up tonight. So I want to start by talking about some things about the business environment that are really increasing the need for leadership agility these days. So, one of them is the fact that not only are we going through we're not just going through a period of rapid change, we have entered an era of accelerating change that appears to not have any stopping point. So I think that's the mind-boggling thing about it, is that as leaders we need to adjust to the things changing very, very rapidly, and they will change even more rapidly in the future. At some point we're probably going to come into some kind of human limit. Which is, and we'll have to deal with that, but I think Agile is already a way to begin to deal with that, and I think leadership agility is another way. So we have this going on, this other big global deep trend of increasing interconnection between everybody and everything. So these are kind of the global tips of the iceberg, but I would submit that probably all of you in your organizations find that everything is more interconnected than it used to be. You have more stakeholders to deal with than you used to. The issues that you're dealing with them are more complex. The research indicates that's only going to increase. So these are 2 big reasons why we need Agile and we need agility in all of its aspects. You can put these 2 trends onto a graph like this, and you get a kind of a story that it tells, which is once upon a time, the pace of change and the degree of interconnection between everything was fairly low, back in simpler times. And then we reached an era where you could say we have a moderate pace of change and degree of interconnection. That more or less corresponds to the last half of the last century. We have now, right, which is this unprecedented era of accelerating change and very high interconnectivity. And one way to define agility is it's the ability to deal effectively with these 2 forces, whether you're an organization, a team, or an individual leader. Separate from what I did on the book, the basic, so it's a whole combination of things that basically came up with the same conclusions. There was some more survey research, some was academic research, some was case studies. Conclusion from every one of these studies is that the more agile the organization in terms of its ability to deal with rapid change and complexity, the higher its business performance. Everything else being equal, if the agility of the organization was higher, the business performance was higher. Okay. Now, one of these studies by, anybody know of this magazine called The Economist in the UK? Right, okay. So they sponsored a study, and it was a global survey of executives around the world. And one of the questions they asked them was, how essential is organizational agility to your continued success as a business? 90% said, yes, essential. Then they asked them, so given that that's so essential, how would you assess your own organization against how agile you think it needs to be? Well, they weren't so positive about that. And then they asked a really interesting question, which was, what do you see as the biggest obstacles to increased agility in your company? So I'm going to tell you the answer to that in just a minute, but I want to ask you what you experience. I would imagine that you probably have experienced some obstacles to Agile in your organizational life. What I'd like are some words or phrases that sort of capture what are some of the things that stand out to you as, obstacles.
Only for software.
I'm sorry?
It's only for software.
It's only for software. We don't need to go outside of that.
Dysfunctional.
Dysfunctional.
Agile.
So, say more.
Dysfunctional agile. That's a phrase that I've heard a lot.
And what does it mean to you?
I don't know.
But you've heard people say that. Okay. Maybe ask them. Ask them what they mean. Yeah.
Upper management unwilling to change?
Upper management? No. You ran into that. Just a little bit of that. Yeah. Yes?
Can't find qualified people.
Okay. Can't find the qualified people to do the Agile thing. I'm sorry?
Existing code makes it difficult to evolve.
Okay. Right.
Somebody over here.
Culture.
Okay. More.
It's just, we've always done it that way. Why should we change?
Mm-hmm. And that's sort of an unspoken norm. Is what you say culture, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
If it works, don't change or improve.
Sorry, say again?
If it works, don't change.
Oh, right. Yeah. If it's not broke, don't fix. Yeah.
Bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Bureaucracy.
We're a heavily regulated organization. We can't do Agile.
Okay. All right.
We don't have metrics like the concept of confidence of the agile.
Okay. Okay. So it's sort of endless, right? Like, one more.
Product owners aren't empowered to say no. In fact, no one is.
No one is empowered to say no. Okay. So I wanted to, let's see. Oh, that's the appropriate slide, right? It can definitely feel that way. That looks really hard to move, doesn't it? So back to what these executives said about obstacles to Agile in their organizations. They basically, I would divide it into two broad areas. Okay. The first area has to do with the need for Agile systems, structures, roles, processes, methods, and whether the right things were done to make those things happen. Also mentioned a lack of an Agile mindset on behalf of, the resistors, or even on the part of the leaders who were promoting Agile, but who were not being Agile. But the other group of things I would put into the bucket of leadership and culture. And in fact, there were more things mentioned in this circle than in this circle. Okay? So, top leaders not being Agile. They don't have a culture of trust, empowerment, and participation. They don't have cross-functional collaboration. All things that could be brought about by the right kind of leadership. But they're saying one of our obstacles is we don't have that. In other words, my summary of this, of what they're saying, is that while they talked about structures and systems as being essential, they felt like the bigger issue in their organizations was culture. And they tied that to leadership because they felt leadership is the primary lever for changing culture. Let me lay it out this way. Often when people talk about agile leadership, my experience is that they're talking about sponsorship, which is something a leader can do, but it's not necessarily the same thing as leadership. So to sponsor an agile project, you know, here's the agile mindset again, the importance of that, that's mentioned even in a sponsorship role. You're expected to support agile methods. To use agile methods yourself might be another way. Like, okay, hey, we're an executive team that does stand-up meetings. We have a backlog, you know, or whatever they want to borrow that's seen as evidence of real putting your money where your mouth is sponsorship. And rather vague directives about how to actually lead that I'm going to overstate as simply as don't be a traditional manager. Not so much about what to do instead. So I'm not saying everybody is completely wedded to this model of agile leadership, but this seems to be quite a dominant one in my experience. Now, a leadership role of upper and middle management, to me, would include things like setting the context for the company or for the division or whatever they're leading, as you would need to do in any company, right? It's not just about sponsoring an agile project. It's about the success of the company and what it's trying to do and its mission and vision and so on. There's being agile, which is, in my view, different than having an agile mindset. Although having an agile mindset is helpful to being agile, it doesn't guarantee that you will be agile. Partly because I think that there is no such, you could not find on the internet any definition of agile mindset. So you might want to rush to put that up on Wikipedia or something with your signature. Everything seems to point to the Agile Manifesto and to the values and the principles there, you know, which are obviously very powerful and have resulted in an amazing transformation. At the same time, I think they're somewhat difficult to use as a guideline for daily behavior. Valuing something and valuing something else even more doesn't necessarily tell you what to do in a lot of different situations. So I think actually looking at agile leadership means looking at things like, what does it mean to be agile while you're leading a change in the organization, whether that be agile or something else? What does it mean to be agile as you develop a high-performing team? What does it mean to be agile in a pivotal conversation? So I think we need to understand how agility works in all these different areas to really understand agile leadership. And then the last one here about actually having the agility to move over just one step and to proactively improve yourself as a leader, to pick things that you want to work on, that you feel like you can improve, and experiment with those things and get feedback and reflect on them and try again. That's another form of agility that we'll talk about a little bit more later. So to finish off the story that I started about, you know, organizational agility in the research is correlated with higher business performance. My firm, ChangeWise, did some additional research with a couple of research outfits. We did one study in the US and one in Europe. And the bottom line of those was that the most agile organizations, everything else being equal, were also the higher business performers. So that was replicated. But it also found that higher levels of leadership agility in an organization, in the way I've started to define and we'll go into more this evening, that is correlated with higher levels of organizational agility. So that kind of goes back to the notion that culture and leadership are key levers for organizational agility. Here in this research, in the survey research anyway, that is borne out. So there's a real through line between leadership agility, organizational agility, and business performance. Just to pause for a moment, I just wrote an article called Bringing Leadership Agility to Agile. It's just published. And we want to make it available to everyone here. In fact, everybody in both organizations. So we were going to do a sign-up sheet, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to put it on the newsletter, a link on the newsletter. So just kind of keep your eyes out for that. This is, compared to what we're doing tonight, tonight is a little bit more of an analytical run-through of the leadership agility practices and what they can do. This article is more like a story-based. Here's what it would look like in practice. Here's like how you can use leadership agility methods alongside Agile methods to have an even bigger impact. So keep your eyes open for that, if you would. Next thing I want to do is to actually give you a brief experience of leadership agility. And to do that, I'm going to ask you to put your stuff down, your notes, your drinks, your whatever, and stand up for a moment. I'd like to say that at least so far nobody has been seriously injured or terribly embarrassed as a result of this exercise. So here's what I'd like you to do. Put your feet, feel your feet really vividly on the ground so you feel very grounded, right? And then I want you to put your hands in front of you like this and put all of your attention on the space between your hands, almost like you're looking at a screen. So you're totally focused in. And this represents us focused on any task, any leadership task, anything we're trying to do during the day. Now I want you to then open up your arms and let your vision expand accordingly. So go ahead, you can do more than that. You can expand more than that. More than that, everyone. Okay, and let your vision expand and take in the larger perspective, the larger context, take anything relevant from that back into a focus on doing whatever needs to be done next. Okay? Sit down. You can all go home now. You have the secret of leadership agility. So seriously, the reason I'm doing it like this is because it is this cycle, which can be called reflective action, because you are alternating between action and reflection, right? Taking in new things and then acting again and connecting your action and your reflection together, right? So it's by getting really good at those iterations of action and reflection and being able to do them quickly and being able to go back even farther when you need to into deeper levels of what's going on that makes you an increasingly agile leader. So just a couple of things I want to say about this, because this is really at the heart of everything else we're going to talk about tonight. So sometimes we get sort of caught up in doing, would you say? Sometimes we're just like, we're into this, and we're just kind of, and then we grab the next thing, and we're into that, and we don't necessarily spend much time putting what we're doing in context, or thinking about other people's perspectives, or how we could grow and develop in the way we lead this meeting that we're getting ready to run. So that's the sort of being in a do loop. I don't know if that's the computer definition of a do loop, but that's my definition of a do loop that we can get into as humans. Just do. Now the other extreme, of course, is, I've worked with a couple of companies in my career where the culture was kind of like, let's think about that some more. Let's keep on analyzing it, and in the process, why don't we get kind of paralyzed while we're analyzing and do this analysis paralysis thing. Or let's talk to some more stakeholders, before we do anything. So that's sort of an equally unagile approach, right? It just sort of gets stuck in another part of the loop. So just let me give you sort of an example. So what would this actually look like in practice? So let's say that you are leading a meeting with your team, and one of the things that you would like to get better at is to really engage your team more in your team meetings and have them participate more and put out more of their ideas. Okay, this is a recent conviction you've just developed. So let's say you're in the meeting and you're about halfway through the meeting and you suddenly realize you've been doing the meeting. You suddenly go, oh, I've been talking almost the whole time and they haven't been participating very much, and a couple of people look kind of tuned out. So with that sort of reflective awareness, then I am in a position where I can adjust how I'm leading the meeting so that I can get people more engaged, right? That would be a very simple example of something like this. What I want to do now is to, I said before I was going to show you how to take this practice of reflective action and sort of focus it in 4 different areas. And this, I think, any leader, anybody who's in a leadership position, or even if you're in more of a coaching or consulting position, this can be extremely relevant as well. I think what would make it most relevant for you would be if you would bring to mind right now a project that you're working on. Something that you care about, that maybe it's a new project, maybe you're in the middle of the project, could be small, could be large, right? Should have stakeholders, but most projects have stakeholders, some kind, right? So keeping that in mind, so context setting agility is about when you step back, what you're stepping back from is kind of your close-in view of your project, of all the things you have to do, right, to get this thing done. The larger context is that this probably fits into strategic context that this is part of, that you can choose to focus on or not focus on, right? So context setting agility is going back into that space, seeing what it really looks like, getting insights about it, being able to articulate it. Why is there a need for change? What kind of scope does this change have? What are, at the end of the day, how will I know we're successful? Those are the kinds of questions that occur to you when you step back from the immediacy of your project into the larger context. Now, another type of agility has to do with stakeholders. So it's, first of all, who are the key stakeholders? It means stepping back from my project and why it's such a great project and why everybody should support my project, that's sort of obvious to me, and look at it instead from the perspective of, another person who's going like, I got my own project, and what's so great about this one? And I don't have much time, and how am I going to support this, and why should I support this? So putting yourself into the shoes of those people, some of whom may be quite supportive, some people who may be quite skeptical, some people in the middle, and being able to develop strategies for creating greater alignment with your stakeholders. And then there's creative agility. And this has to do more with the specific changes, concrete changes that your project needs to make once it really gets going and looking at the specifics. So it involves both creative and analytical, critical and creative thinking. And what you're stepping back from here is your own assumptions about what the real problems are and what the best solutions are. And to the extent that you already have ideas about those things, this doesn't mean that your ideas are wrong. It just means you're stepping back from assuming they're right to being able to look at them in a larger perspective and open up a space for yourself and other people to think about other possibilities. And then I'm going to talk, the other is self-leadership agility, which I will talk more about in a bit. Okay, now, levels of leadership agility. So the idea here is that the things I just described, you can do at more superficial levels of agility and at deeper, more profound, robust levels of agility. And it's really in growing your capacity to go to different levels that you grow as a leader and that you get a way to tie in with the title of this talk. So the levels are expert, achiever, and catalyst. And I just want to tell you a few things about each one of these in terms of when are they each most appropriate. I'm going to go in much more detail in a few minutes about the three levels. In fact, we're going to play some audio clips that illustrate each of the levels and then have you discuss them with a partner and discuss them in the large group. So that's going to get very interactive, but I just want to sort of set up the scene for doing this. So the first is just to understand that according to the research, roughly 55% of today's managers operate almost exclusively at the expert level. That is a level that has been found to be the most effective in environments where the pace of change is slow and the degree of interconnection is relatively low. Okay, so it's not that there aren't any environments like that, but there are a lot less of those environments than there used to be, right? The second most popular level of agility, the one that we see the next most, is what's called the achiever level. And this is a particularly effective environments where you have moderate pace of change, moderate degrees of interconnection. I would associate that with the last half of the last century. So we have something like 90% of managers who are operating in ways that can be highly effective in environments that no longer exist. Now, that doesn't say that these can't ever be effective. That's not the case at all. But it's very significant that we're finding that the catalyst level leaders, which were clearly the most effective in today's environment and the least likely to burn out in today's environment, that we're only seeing about 10% right now of leaders who are consistently able to act in this catalyst fashion. Now, I think as we put more content on these, I think this will mean more to you than it does initially. But it is a way, I think it starts to give us a way to understand what we're seeing in our organizations in terms of the readiness, the ability to embrace Agile and to lead in ways that are Agile. Okay. So, wait, before I do that, let me just say, so these audio clips are connected with a little case study. The case study comes out of the book. The book is full of real-life stories of leaders at different levels of agility in specific situations like leading a team. There's one chapter at the beginning that is all fictional, but the fictional stories are all highly research-based. In other words, everything that you see the leader do in these stories is based on research on, let's say, how expert leaders act across the board. We'll see an expert leader sort of representing that in this scenario. So we're going to see one leader that we're going to call Ed, who's the new CEO of a company we're going to call Overmeyer, and we're going to see this exact same person in every way deal with a big business challenge, but deal with it in different ways because they're at different levels of agility. If that makes sense. So here's the scenario. So Overmeyer is a family business. It's in the advanced manufacturing technology business, which means they make robots and other technology for factory floors. And they used to be probably the most innovative company in the industry, a real leader in the industry, but no more. Their founder passed away, and so the daughter of the founder, who herself is the CEO in a publishing company, is not going to come in and step in and run this company, but she's going to become the chairperson of the board and do a search for the new CEO who's going to turn this company around, right? So the mandate for this CEO is to restore profitability, because we're a little bit wobbly right now, and to get us back into industry leadership. And however, this will not be easy. This is a complex business. There's fierce competition. Things are changing fast, including customer requirements are changing very fast. So it's definitely a challenge. Now, so here's the person that they selected to come in and run Overmeyer. We're going to call him Ed. And Ed's got just the right background. He's just got just the right experience. He's really smart. He's a quick study. He is an assertive kind of guy. And he has a strong track record in his own leadership. He, in fact, was CEO of a company that was taking market share away from a smaller company, taking market share away from Overmeyer. So perfect person to lead this company. Except one thing we don't know. When we hired him, we forgot to check his level of agility. So we're going to get a chance to see all three versions here. And so as we go through these audio clips, just want to give you an idea of the way they're organized. We'll start with the expert, and it's as if is at dinner with an old friend. He's been doing this job for 7 months. Every once in a while they get together and catch up. And his friend is asking, so you got this new job and everything, how's it going? Tell me about it. And we're going to hear about how Ed leads change, how he leads teams, and how he engages in pivotal conversations by how he responds to the questions that are asked at dinner. Okay, so that's kind of what the audio clips represent. So as we run these, I'd like you to listen and be ready to discuss with a partner for just a couple of minutes what you see as the characteristics of the expert leader.
Well, Ed, you've been at it for 7 months. How's it going?
It's a tough job, but it's the kind of pressure I thrive on, having to use my industry know-how to fix a business. I'm a quick study. Wind me up, and I drill down, figure out the problems, and come up with the right solutions.
How did you get started?
I went right away after the information I needed to wrap my head around the business. I met with each of my directs, but I concentrated on the main functions: R&D, manufacturing, and sales and marketing. I kept in shape, lugging 2 briefcases stuffed with reports back and forth between home and the office. It didn't take me long to figure out some obvious things that needed to be done. I got R&D to accelerate development on a couple of products that could really be big for us. And I got sales and marketing to support faster launches. I told my marketing VP he needed to cut costs for the year by 15%, and I showed him a few specific budget items to prune. Also, I told my VP of Finance to start getting me the monthly numbers on time. I gave him a new way to format the data to make it easier for me to analyze our costs.
What's it been like working with your executive team?
I get more real work done with my directs when I meet with them one-on-one. Getting everybody together on a regular schedule, whether we need to or not, just isn't productive. Don't get me wrong, if we need a group meeting, I'll call one. But I usually use those meetings mainly to keep everybody informed about my latest thinking and to review progress. I usually start with sales and marketing, then focus on manufacturing, then R&D. By and large, though, group meetings usually don't get you that much. People tend to hold back. I've tried all the usual techniques to get people engaged: forceful arguments, provocative questions. I've even tried to get them to debate issues. But I usually leave thinking, no wonder this place is in trouble. Everybody just sits back and plays it safe.
Have you had any conversations so far that have been especially challenging?
Last week, my HR VP asked if she could talk to me about company morale. I said okay, and she started talking about this meeting I just held with the group that runs R&D. Something about my cutting people off when they reacted to what I was saying. Well, I had to stop her right there because the real problem was that they were defending business as usual. I just wish more people here shared my passion for making this a first-class operation. Sometimes I wish I could clone myself.
Okay, this is a research-based snapshot of supposedly roughly 55% of managers. Take just a couple of minutes, find a partner, one or two people next to you, and just share for a couple of minutes what you see as the key characteristics of the expert level. So, just a couple of takeaways that I would want you to have about the expert leader. One thing is, I'm going to do a slide on each one of these, and the first bullet on these slides is really an assumption that gets made if we're operating at any of these levels about what leadership really is. It's not necessarily what we would believe. Like if you interviewed me and you said, "What do you believe about leadership?" I might say one thing, but if you look at me acting and doing my leadership thing, then these are the assumptions that you would attribute to me as a result of my behavior. So the expert one is leadership happens because of authority and expertise, right? So I just sort of assume that and I act out of that. And it's not the only reason I act the way I do as an expert, but it's one aspect. And when I'm leading change, my capacity for stepping back as an expert is more limited than it is at the other levels. So in terms of context setting agility, I'm not really strategic, I'm tactical. Does that make sense? So the changes I'm going to make are tactical changes. They're going to be incremental changes. They're going to be in the area that I have authority over, right? And if I'm leading a team, whether I use the team word or not, I'm not really building a team. What I'm really doing is I'm working very closely with each of my direct reports, sort of mentoring them and making sure that, they're doing what they need to do, they're reporting into me, what they're doing. And if I have a meeting, which as you heard might happen or might not happen for an expert, it's likely to be a searchlight meeting. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, first we'll hear from R&D, and we'll have a dialogue with the CEO. And then we'll move on to manufacturing, and R&D can relax and start looking at their phone for the rest of the meeting. So, that's kind of the approach is sort of like that. And then in pivotal conversations are where you have different points of view, and yet you need to resolve them. So at the expert level, our tolerance for experiencing differences, kind of like, oh, we don't agree on this, and we have to agree, don't we? And, ooh, that feels hard. So how do I get it over with quickly? So there are different styles. One style is to be very assertive, the way we heard this ed. This was our assertive personality ed that we saw in the scenario. So that means, in other words, I'm going to try to get it over with quickly by quickly dominating and deciding. Now, another way to do it is to avoid conflict, or to seem as if you are going along with what the other person is saying, whether you actually are or not. And that is another expert strategy that's sometimes used. So, depending on people's personalities, they may have more one than the other. But what the common denominator is this discomfort with differences. Okay. So we're going to hear now Ed, the same person, same background, same change, but as an achiever, and listen to the differences between the achiever and the catalyst.
Well, Ed, you've been at it for 7 months. How's it going?
It's moving forward. The big challenge is shifting people's mindsets. This place has an interesting history. In his own time, Cecilia Overmeyer's father was a pretty innovative guy. During the 90s, this company was a real industry leader, but they fell into the success syndrome mentality. That's the basic problem here. I'm working on getting everyone's head back into the marketplace, thinking further out, and looking at things from the customer's point of view.
How did you get started?
Got to know the executive team, did skip-level interviews, talked with current customers and ones we'd lost, walked around the factory, and generally made myself visible. Even did a town meeting. I think leadership has a lot to do with the personal qualities you bring to your mission, that ability to challenge and inspire others to go beyond what they think is possible. We need to revamp our new product development process and some of our other business processes so we can be more responsive to our customers. From a strategic point of view, we also need to deal with commoditization by improving and expanding the services we offer. The other thing I did at the outset was look at our people. Having the right strategy and infrastructure is essential, but to execute, you've got to have the right people.
What's it been like working with your executive team?
We usually meet once a week, unless something major comes up. I start by doing updates and sharing important information, but I try to reserve most of the time for group discussion of important topics, either strategic or operational. I know I need to motivate them to focus more externally, so in every meeting I try to introduce at least one agenda item that stretches them in that direction. For example, I instituted a more meaningful customer survey process, and I make sure that we talk at the executive level about results and implications. I started a strategic planning exercise, and that's worked really well. Nothing too detailed or ponderous. I used it mainly to make sure my team and their directs are all working off the same data. Even more important, we're driving for the same outcomes. By having them work on how we're going to achieve Cecilia's mandate, I got them to buy into the mandate itself. Not only that, I got them to sign off on some new strategies that really worked for me in my last job.
Have you had any conversations so far that have been especially challenging?
I don't think everyone's going to be up to the challenge in front of us. One guy in particular I got very concerned about, Ray, my VP of Manufacturing. Ray's performance really stuck out like a sore thumb, so I knew I had to deal with it. These discussions are never easy, but I know from experience that if you avoid acting on major performance issues, you can be sorry later. I had a number of conversations with Ray, telling him what he needed to do if he was going to stay with us. I asked our HR VP to help me be sure I was handling this in the right way. It finally came down to this. I realized I wasn't going to achieve Cecilia's mandate with Ray in that role. Last week, I finally told him he had to move on. We got him a good package, and I'm probably going to replace him from the outside.
Very different approach to the same situation. Turn to your partner or partners and just talk for a few minutes about what do you think are the key differences that you're seeing between the achiever and the expert. Thank you. So a few takeaways here. So the underlying assumption shifts to one of having authority and expertise but not seeing it as the core of leadership. The core of leadership is now about challenging other people and making it satisfying for them to contribute to larger organizational objectives. Now we're shifting from a tactical focus to a strategic focus. Focus on outcomes. So exactly how you do something is not as important to me as that you get to that outcome. Right? That makes me more flexible, more agile than the expert is in that. So in leading change, you're likely to have done some kind of analysis of your environment. The other thing that you heard in there was a strong emphasis on getting buy-in from stakeholders. Right? So it's like, well, they're not going to follow me just because I have authority or expertise. I have to work for this. This is part of being a leader. Right? And it's part of motivating other people. Now I see that, hey, all of my direct reports are interconnected in their work, and I need to make sure that they are working together as a finely oiled machine, a great team. Right? And that's a big part of my responsibility as a leader, to make that happen, not just to supervise them one-on-one. And now I have more of a moderate tolerance for dealing with differences, so I'm likely to have, according to my personality, either a predominantly assertive or more accommodative style in dealing with differences. But at the achiever level, I have more balance between these two extremes than I did as an expert. Okay? All right. Now, I would say that particularly looking at sort of all the things that underlie these takeaway points, that the expert level is just not compatible with Agile. Just all of the different ways of thinking and doing things, very compatible with Waterfall, not really compatible with Agile. And we're going to see in the Catalyst something that I think can help realize the true spirit of Agile. So it sort of evolves along those lines as far as I can tell. Okay, let's listen to the Catalyst. This is, again, something we see only about 10% of the time, and see what are the differences here.
Well, Ed, you've been at it for 7 months. How's it going?
It's quite a challenge, but I'm excited about where we're going. In the martial arts, they say you need to aim right through and beyond your target. That's what I want to do with Cecilia's mandate. I envision a company that will not only regain its status as industry leader, but also become a benchmark for other industries, a participative, high-performing organization that's a great place to work. To do that, people need to learn to lead and manage this place in new ways.
How did you get started?
I got to know people at the top levels, but I also walked around a lot and started following some of the social networks. I sought out the innovators, learned what they're doing, and gave them some encouragement. I also met with key customers, including some former customers, and I asked my VPs and their people to do the same. Then we talked about what we learned. A couple of months in, I had a 2-day offsite with my directs and their directs, a good-sized group that included our top overseas managers. I said I'd been in their place a few times before when a new leader came in, and I could easily imagine the questions they might have about the company's plans and their own future. I reiterated our mandate to achieve profitability and industry leadership, and I said, to achieve these objectives, we need everyone to contribute their best work and their best ideas. That's what's going to secure your job and mine, starting right here in this meeting.
What's it been like working with your executive team?
In many ways, it's like a laboratory. I'm trying to develop an executive team that can serve as the prototype of a participative culture, which they can then disseminate to the rest of the organization. This is so important that I try to spend 2 hours a week with the team, engaging in important strategic and operational issues. They know I make the final decisions, but they have a lot of influence. I may put my ideas on the table and ask for their critique, or I may just throw out a topic and let them go at it for a while. But the main thing is they see that I can be influenced by their ideas. It creates an environment where anyone can step in and exert constructive leadership. It also models what they can do with their teams. Another vehicle I'm using is the strategic planning process. I wanted to set up a way to get meaningful input from a cross-section of people at all levels. Not only just as a feel-good thing, but because I think people at all levels can come up with interesting ideas, strategic as well as operational, and that can really be useful.
Have you had any conversations so far that have been especially challenging?
About 3 months ago, I asked my executive team for feedback on my leadership approach. After some hemming and hawing, some people actually spoke up. Parts of that discussion were a little difficult, but it was very helpful overall. The most challenging was a series of meetings with Ray, my VP of manufacturing. Finally, I just told him very straight what I'd observed about his attitude and his performance. I checked out a few assumptions I had, asked him how he saw the whole situation, and gave him a lot of room to respond. Pretty soon he opened up and acknowledged that he was in over his head, trying to manage an organization on an international scale. I said, if you could invent any job you wanted, what would it be? Turns out that Ray loves being a plant manager. We concluded that he'd be a great asset back in a plant manager role. He said he'd love to do that, even with the pay cut. I won't go into detail about how it's all going to work, but it's opened the door to several other important personnel changes.
Okay, Ed, the Catalyst. So I'd like you to take just a couple of minutes and talk with your partner, and the question being, what is different about this Catalyst leadership than the Achiever leadership? Thank you. So, a couple of takeaways about the catalyst level of leadership. The underlying assumption is that leadership is really about articulating an inspiring vision, and then, and these are important words, empowering and developing others to make it a reality. And there's something special and different about the vision that the catalyst leaders would create, and that is they were actually thinking farther out in the future than their current strategy. I mean, they were certainly thinking about their current strategy. But they were actually thinking, well, like, what's going to happen after that's done? And how are we going to know what the next strategy is going to be? And given that everything's changing so fast, we probably can't put together, you know, a 10-year strategic plan, right? What do we do? And they said, well, what we do is we create what we would call an agile organization. We create an organization that can sense and respond to whatever comes over the horizon. And we know that there's structural aspects to that, but probably most importantly, there are cultural aspects to that. So, and the cultural aspect, and every one of these catalyst leaders wanted to create the same kind of culture for the same reason. The reason being to create a more agile organization. The culture was to be more empowering, more participative, more straight talk, you know, all the things that you would need to have really great vertical and horizontal communication so you can sense and respond to the changes that take place in the environment. In terms of team leadership, what they were doing was they were saying, well, we got to change the culture in the organization, but I'm not just going to call HR in and say, ordering one culture change program to go. You know, call us when it's all over. Right. They said, okay, we need to become the new culture before we do anything else. So that's the kind of team that we're trying to create, was the same kind of sort of team culture that the team culture that they're trying to create is the same as the organizational culture they're trying to create. And then finally, in pivotal conversations, we found that of the three, that the catalyst leaders are the most comfortable in dealing with differences, and they can get down to, they're equally comfortable advocating their views and inquiring and being receptive to other views. And so they're very good at creating dialogue. And what you saw in that part of the clip that had to do with coming back and talking with Ray in a different way is a good example of that. Yeah.
Something that was common for all three was sort of an attitude of each individual as an atomic individual entity. So when I talk about catalyzing an organization, part of what I'm looking for is not just what did you do, but are there things that we can create as a group? For instance, Ray, did you get all the support you need? Are there things manufacturing needs that could have made it possible for you to succeed?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to get that insight of, so long as we're holding everybody responsible as though they are individuals totally in control of what they do, and missing the what is the group around you, how do we support?
Yeah, very important point. I mean, and this is another thing that there's a lot that wasn't able to get out tonight, but one aspect is what you're talking about, that these teams tended to be what some people have called a shared responsibility team, in the sense that everyone is not only in charge of their own function, but they feel sort of an equal commitment to the organization as a whole that their leadership team leads, so that we are in it to challenge and support each other, and to work together as a cohesive team to make the changes we need to make in the organization. So it definitely gets more systemic in the thinking, and more tuned into the power of relationships. Yeah, and then I'm gonna come back, do a little bit more, then we'll do a Q&A, but let me get Dave first, and then we'll come back.
So this is a powerful overlay on the classic hierarchical organizational structure. Is there a different kind of leadership, of a different dimension, in those handful of organizations in the world that are truly self-managed, where there are no bosses?
I don't have, yeah, I can't tell you on the basis of research what their profiles are. You know, I can just say that I would think that the leaders who are going to be most successful in those roles are going to be ones that are toward the catalyst end of the spectrum. But technically that's speculation. Let me just say a couple more things before we go into a full bore Q&A, because I wanted to mention just a few things. So one thing is just how you think about these levels. If you're going to use this as a lens to think about yourself or your organization, that your agility level does vary throughout the day, but it's around a fairly stable center of gravity. So there's movement, but not like huge swings. And everybody can develop their agility. And I'll talk about about that in a minute. And very important, you retain the capacities that you developed at previous levels. So if you develop the full set of Catalyst leadership capabilities, you still have your inner expert, you still have your inner achiever, you can downshift into those levels as needed. So it's really, the idea here is to have an expansive repertoire to be able to operate at any of the three levels and to then do whatever is needed in a particular situation, whatever level is being called on. I've already mentioned about how I think it lines up with Agile, compatibility with Agile. Self-leadership, I just want to say one thing about, and that is, so there's, he has for many years helped leaders and teams and organizations become more agile. But there's something you could do just walking out of here tonight that could sort of get you more focused on that practice for yourself, and that would be to pick something maybe from one of the examples in the talk from tonight, or something you've been sort of meaning to do more of as a leader or a coach or a consultant. And once you are clear what that is, to make it a practice to find everyday situations where you can experiment with doing that. So make this something, I'm going to do this for the next 2 months, right? And every day I'm going to look for an opportunity to X, right? And I'm going to, when I try it out, I'm not going to expect myself to be perfect. I'm going to reflect, I'm going to get feedback, and I'm going to keep the process going. So that's what self-leadership is, and self-leadership agility is the ability to do this kind of stepping back and looking at yourself sort of quickly and easily as you gain more and more practice. Now, in doing something like this, it can really help to have a kind of a structure to guide you, and that's what this Leadership Agility Accelerator tool is that I mentioned at the beginning. So this is something that will allow you to clarify your current leadership goals. Just what are you trying to do as a leader, not your leadership development. What level of agility are you at now? What are some practices that you could choose to work on that are specifically pegged to your current level of agility that would help you go to the next level, and that would help you accomplish the things you want to accomplish and put that into a nice, solid action plan template. So that's what that tool is about. And so when we get a little bit later here, when we're going to be passing out the handouts and so on, that's a chance to do this for half price. And the business cards in the bag are for the freebie. Get a freebie accelerator, right? Okay, so now.
Thank you very much, Bill Joyner.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll be happy to talk with anybody who wants to talk further.